going to do a screen share here and get this thing going. All right. So doing it old school here with some PowerPoint slides. So welcome to the Recession Proof 6-week course. It's really about building out some bulletproof financial systems. So some quick kind of housekeeping stuff. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. So I guess I should probably start with telling you who the heck I am. So I'm Dan Nicholson, and I guess if you could imagine that cliche kid growing up scheming on business ideas, that was me as a kid. My parents were always trying to rein me in from doing something too crazy, and ended up getting a degree in accounting and then separately a degree in information systems, kind of thinking that would be the broadest skill set to start a business, not at all thinking that I would work in accounting. And then I went sort of in the furthest direction away from being entrepreneurial. So I ended up getting a fellowship at the board that writes all the accounting standards in the U.S. and something called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. So moved to the East Coast. I'm from Seattle. I live in Seattle now. I moved to just outside of New York City, where the board is located, and helped write an accounting standard on derivatives and hedging activities, which again is not the most entrepreneurial thing. Accounting research and in particular around this whole derivatives thing, which the whole underpinning of this standard was this term contemporaneous documentation, which again feels like kind of the least entrepreneurial term that you could imagine. And I was amongst the sort of best and brightest, and I was sort of miserable during it because, again, it was not this entrepreneurial thing. And the other 6 fellows who were in the program, they moved to New York City and Chicago, and they work for one of the big global firms, basically on their accounting standard. And then here I was. I moved back to Seattle, and I started working for also one of the big global accounting firms, Deloitte, but I thought I was going to be working in consulting, and they had much different plans for me, turns out. So basically spent the next 2 to 3 years at Deloitte doing what I would have done had I moved to New York or Chicago, which was anything and everything derivatives. So in the West Coast, Microsoft at the time had about $100 billion in invested assets and a pretty large hedging program. And there's some big banks and other things on the West Coast and energy trading companies and all that. So did that, and then I had a little bit of a quarter-life crisis, and I moved into an internal accounting role for a Warren Buffett company who was getting ready to go public. And so sort of helped out with that process a bit. Then I moved into strategic finance for a guy named Steve Loudon, who's now the CFO of Roku. And around that time, I sort of realized that, hey, I'm pretty good at this accounting finance thing, and maybe there's an opportunity to do something different in the accounting space. So that was sort of the basis about 9 years ago of starting my primary gig, which is running a firm called Nth Degree CPAs. And we are somewhere around the 300th biggest firm out of 42,000 in the U.S., and recently ranked one of the 10 best run mid-sized firms in the U.S. So that's been a super cool experience, and I like to think of myself as a non-conventional accountant, and the things that we're doing with our clients is not just the checking the box on tax and accounting stuff. It's about trying to add some kind of real value, which is how I came up with a lot of the materials that are here in this Recession Proof course. So that's a bit about me. Some logistical stuff. So this has been in a few emails, but just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So every Wednesday for the next 6 weeks here at 1:30 Pacific, we'll jump on a Zoom call. But I'm also going to set up a membership site after this first class is done, and so all the replays and any homework is going to show up there. Can everybody still? I'm just going to kind of jump over and just make sure I'm not missing any comments or anything. Okay. So why are we here to begin with? So it's called Recession Proof course, and but is a recession imminent? Well, maybe. There's some indicators that are positive, some that aren't. So it's always a mixed bag. The problem with a recession, well, there's many problems with a recession. The problem with predicting a recession is that by definition, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. And so you've got to go basically 6 months before you get the official, hey, we're in a recession. So it's a lagging indicator, basically. We find out after the fact. So waiting 6 months, not ideal. At the end of the day, though, it's hard to definitively predict when a recession is going to happen and when it's not. There's this whole notion of causation versus correlation. And this gets muddled quite a bit, I think, from my professional experience. So back in the days when I was working for Steve Loudon, the now CFO of Roku, we were tasked with deciding sort of go or no-go decisions for various marketing campaigns and new product launches. And this was within a large national bank. And every 6 months or so, someone from the online banking marketing team would pitch us on some massive marketing campaign, I mean, 50 million plus in marketing spend, to try to drive traffic towards higher enrollment in online banking and higher enrollment in bill pay services. This is more than 10 years ago. So dating myself a little bit with the story. But their whole point was we need to get more people on online banking and more people on bill pay because the data shows that people who are using online banking and bill pay carry a higher balance and they use more of the bank's services. They are likely to use credit cards and lines of credit and all these other things. And so their argument was that by signing somebody up for online banking and bill pay, they're going to necessarily carry these higher balances and use more of their services. And so it's a causation argument. Online banking causes them to have a higher balance. Of course, when you say that out loud, it sounds kind of silly. There's a correlation. It just so happens that someone using those services 10, 12 years ago also happened to carry higher balances. And the reasons were these folks also tended to be more proactive with their money. They tended to be more likely to use technology. Just the characteristics of who they were as a individual led them to use more of their services. Purely signing up for the service doesn't cause them to carry higher balances. So understanding causation versus correlation is essential when making decisions. And you're going to see a lot of these things in the news about, for example, inverted yield curves, saying that's the cause of a recession. It's merely correlative. In other words, when we've had negative yield curves, sometime thereafter we've had a recession, and so there's a positive correlation to it. I also saw a study recently about how RV sales were on a decline, and in previous recessions, RV sales declined before the recession occurred. And that's another example of something that's a correlation. It's not causing the recession. So while this is called recession-proofing your business, ultimately we're trying to build systems and processes so that we can win under all environments. And we can win while still playing our game. So we don't want to compromise. We don't want to play somebody else's game and sort of, I guess to use a cliche, we don't want to be a sellout. We don't want to look back on our business and find that we had to compromise who we were, who our values are, so that we could make money or grow a business. We want to play our game. So that's really what I'm going to help you solve over the course of the next 6 weeks. And I've got quite a bit of content to cover. So here's sort of the rundown. Here's how we're going to get there. So phase 1 is understanding the environment, the playing field. That's today. So we're going to talk about some biases, and we're going to understand how you play the game, how you play your game. Then next week we're going to get into defining your principles and priorities. So defining financial principles, something called the financial barbell, something called the profit priority methodology, and then core capital. And then the remaining 4 weeks is going to be where we really get into the meat of things. So we're going to be identifying gaps within your business, where areas that we can optimize assets, liabilities, optimize cost structure, tax structure, and then how do we get all that stuff implemented. Of course, we want to start with quick wins. What's the ease? Business owners are usually pretty good at picking off the easy solution, but we want to get the easy solution plus the easy solutions. Let's pick those off. Let's get the right systems in place, the right reporting, and let's make sure that we're sharpening the saw on an ongoing basis, that we're continually reassessing our business so that when new gaps arrive and new quick wins, for example, show up, that we're able to tackle those. So that's what we're going to do. There's going to be homework in between these sessions or these weeks, and the more that you implement, the more you're going to get out of this. Of course, that's a cliche. The more that you engage with me on Messenger or via email, or you send me your homework, the more you're going to get back from me and my team. So happy to send back Loom videos, jump on calls, so on and so forth, to make sure that you're getting maximum value out of this. I want to make sure that everybody in this training has the opportunity to substantially get a substantial ROI on their investment in this course, and I think it's going to happen for sure. So not great at navigating Zoom clearly, so just trying to make sure I'm not missing any questions that are getting posted. All good, we can hear. Okay, cool. All right, so that's kind of the agenda. So there's a lot to cover. The first 2 weeks we're just laying the groundwork to do the really hard work, but it's sort of essential so that we're making the right decisions within our business. So with that, I want to start with this quote, this equation. I wish I came up with it. Chip Conley came up with it. Chip is a fairly prolific hoteler and investor, and most recently was a senior advisor to Airbnb. And he came up with these series of formulas, and this one really resonated with me. And it's the equation. The equation goes: anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness. And so it's this idea that the sense of lack of power actually amplifies the uncertainty that you feel. And when I saw that equation, it really rang true to me. And for years, I've been thinking about this whole idea of financial uncertainty. And so I think it's called the distributive property, going back to second or third grade math here. But we could just simply apply financial to each side of those, and we could say financial anxiety equals financial uncertainty times financial powerlessness. And intuitively, this just makes sense to me. And when I've talked to people one-on-one, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And so if that's true, if you buy into that narrative, and then how do we reduce our uncertainty and our sense of powerlessness? Because we don't want to have anxiety. We don't want to have financial anxiety. Part of building out these bulletproof systems, the outcome that we want is to have control over our money. We don't want to have uncertainty. We don't want to have a sense of or lack of power. So step one is we got to identify the cause of uncertainty. And so typically the lack of uncertainty or the sense of uncertainty is because we have lack of clarity on the future or lack of clarity on the current state. Now, the thing about uncertainty is that we can't necessarily get it to zero. It's inherently impossible to do so, right? There's things that we can't control. There's external forces. In the context of this class, recession, the economy, but also there's uncertainty about what our competitors might do. There's an uncertainty about what some social media platform might do to our business or to our marketing. And you can sort of go on and on. And so we can't ever get uncertainty to zero per se, but we can get as much clarity as possible on the sense of what we're looking to achieve in the future, as well as understanding our current state. Also, we want to identify what's the cause of our lack of power, and sometimes it's just lack of desire. I see a lot of avoidance that exists with folks' money, the financial side of things, And so there's a lack of desire to really figure it out and define it. Lack of digestible information. So there's a principle that I subscribe to, or a cheesy acronym. Actually, it's called the BIRD. I call it the BIRD principle. But everything that we get as it relates to our money and ideally to our entire business needs to provide business insight that's relevant and digestible. And oftentimes we're getting things that provide insight. It's like, oh, that's great. I'm glad to have that information. But then is it actually digestible? And in this case, digestible means, can I make a decision quickly? My criteria is under 2 minutes. If I get some information in less than 2 minutes, can I make a decision? And one of those decisions might be, here's what I need to do next. So we don't necessarily have to have clarity in all the actions that we have to take, but we need to be able to have enough clarity to know what the next step is. So if you have to start doing side calculations regarding some financial statement that you got, that's a digestibility issue. Relevance is really a timeliness. So next item down, timeliness issue. So maybe you get something that's really digestible and it provides insight, but it's just late. You're getting your profit and loss statement a month or two after the fact. Okay, this is digestible. It's insightful, but it's not timely, and so you can't really change what happened in the past, and you can't really make much of an informed decision because we're already a month later. Proximity is really as it relates to like accessibility. So how accessible is the information, and are the people that you're working, not just the information, but the people who are helping you, are you able to get a hold of them? Single point of failure often is connected to this whole proximity thing, which is, hey, I can't get a hold of this person who's helping me with make sense of my finances, and it's only one person. So when they're not available, everything just falls apart. So these are sort of the things that drive a sense of powerlessness over our finances. And so what usually folks then go to, and this has sort of been the trend buzzword, is, well, I need to do some mindset work. Because if we go back here, I mentioned that one of the issues is desire. And a lot of times folks will say, well, that's a mindset issue. Or digestibility, well, that's a mindset issue because of the fact that I just need to learn more so that I can make more sense of the numbers. And so the mindset work goes, and this is sort of the typical diagram of like self-fulfilling traps that exist, that say, hey, I've got some beliefs that lead into expectations that lead to some behavior that feed back into results that reinforce my beliefs, and it becomes this ongoing cycle. Now, I definitely buy into mindset as being an issue, but it's not the only issue. And here's why. Here's the big problem, which is we're subject to biases. There's things that are outside of our control that impact us unknowingly and cause us to make decisions that aren't necessarily economically rational. And so it's not just mindset. And so I'm going to break that down for you a little bit. And so the first issue that we need to consider is this idea of selective attention. So I'm going to play this YouTube video. It's about a minute long, and I just ask you to kind of follow along with it.
Is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count?
All right, so hopefully everyone saw the video. How many passes did you count? Just drop it in the chat. Okay, so we got 13 from Marco. Andrew's got 13 as well. We got some other folks here in the group. 14. Okay. All right. So, all right. So the correct answer is 15.
Correct answer.
But
is
how many of you
15
saw the
passes.
gorilla?
But did you see the gorilla?
So drop in the chat. I know Marco said 13 plus the gorilla. Did you all see the gorilla, or did you just, yes, I guess drop in the chat yes or no. Okay, Andrew saw the gorilla. I know Marco saw it. Only because I've seen this before. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the reality is that same. Okay. Andrew's seen it too. Cool. All right. So moral of the story, you're in the group with almost 22 million other folks then who've seen this before. And so the moral of the story is that if you haven't seen it before, 50% of the people who watch it see the gorilla, 50% don't. And it's because of selective attention. You were biased to counting and only focusing on the folks wearing the white shirt. And so your attention was all focused in that direction. So let me figure out the screen share thing and switch back over. Okay. All right. Can everyone see the PowerPoint again? All right. So we've got this whole issue of selective attention. And so what's going on in that regard, and this is excerpted from one of my favorite books called Thinking, Fast and Slow, from the famous psychologist and to some extent behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman. And we've got this thing going on. We've really got two systems at work. We've got system one, which operates automatically, quickly. It's basically really no sense of voluntary control. And then separately, we've got sort of this separate mental system, system two, which is it's allocating attention to effortful mental activities that demand it. So things like complex computations. And the operations of system two are often, they're associated with subjective experience of agency, choice, concentration. In other words, you're directing system two. Can everybody see the slides? I guess I'm worried I'm going to go too far here, and just drop a comment if you can see the slides. Oh yes, thanks, Margo. Okay, so, and this is excerpted from the book here, but the division of labor between system one and system two is highly efficient. It minimizes effort, it optimizes for performance. The arrangement works well most of the time because system one is generally very good at what it does. It models familiar situations. Its short-term predictions are usually accurate, and its initial reactions to challenges are swift and generally appropriate. But the problem is system one has biases, and therefore systematic errors. It's prone to systematic errors, and as we shall see, it sometimes answers easier questions than the one it was asked, and it has little understanding of logic and statistics. And ultimately, the issue is that system one can't really be turned off. It just is. It just exists. And so the question that's most often asked about cognitive illusions or cognitive bias is whether they can be overcome. And the message is simply, it's not encouraging because of the fact that the system one operates automatically and can't be turned off. Biases cannot be avoided because system two may have no clue to the fact that they exist. So in other words, there's sort of this mechanical thing that's operating in the background that cannot be overridden. And I want to now sort of shift into specific context of what that relates to in this whole money side of things. So I'm going to take us over to something called mental accounting. And so give me a second again to get the share going. All right.
My name is Laurie Santos. I teach psychology at Yale University, and today I want to talk to you about mental accounting. This lecture is part of a series on cognitive biases. Imagine that you decide to go see a new movie that's opening up in your town. You head to the counter and hand the cashier a $20 bill. She gives you back a $10 bill and a $10 ticket. But when you get to the theater door, you realize you don't know where your ticket is. It's not in your purse or your pocket. It's just lost. What would you do? Do you think you'd pay $10 for a new ticket, or would you just head home? If you're like most people, you might be tempted to head home. In fact, when the psychologists Kahneman and Tversky presented this problem to college students, 54% of people said they'd probably just head back home. But now imagine a different scenario. This time, you decide to see the movie, and you head to the counter and hand the cashier $20. This time, she gives you back two $10 bills, so that you can easily pay $10 at the door to get in. But when you get to the door, you realize that you can only find one of the $10 bills. The other one's not in your purse or your pocket. It's just lost. What would you do? Would you pay $10 for the movie or just head home? If you're like most people, you'd probably still go see the movie. In fact, when Kahneman and Tversky presented this problem to college students, 88% of people said they'd probably go to the movie anyway. The different responses to these cases illustrate a bias known as mental accounting. We use different accounts in our heads for different activities, and the resources from one account aren't automatically transferred for use in another. This is why we pretty rarely take $50 from our 401k account to have a nice meal, or why we sometimes blow our tax return on stuff we'd never blow our savings on. In our head, we automatically set up different accounts for different stuff, and if we end up with extra money we didn't expect, say from a windfall in a tax return, or even from an unexpected coupon, we end up blowing that money in this new extra account. It's why gamblers gamble a lot more when they're playing with house money. We use different mental accounts all the time, from the money we plan to spend on something fun like movies and plays, to the accounts we keep for our kids' college tuition. Our minds just naturally keep things separate. The problem is that our intuition to keep things separate violates a classic economic principle, the idea that money should be fungible. Classical economists are often puzzled by the fact that we can't just think of money as, well, money. Why shouldn't a $10 ticket and a $10 bill be the same thing? To an economist, it should be, but for our minds, not so much. The good news is that we can use these funny mental accounts to our advantage. A friend of the behavioral economist Dick Thaler did just this. He set up a new account with money that he planned to donate to charity at the end of every year. Each time something bad happened, parking ticket or a lost $10 for a movie, he took the money out of that account instead. His mental accounting caused him to think that the money wasn't really his anyway, and it made him feel less bad whenever he experienced losses. Our biases toward mental accounting mean that our minds don't work in the way that classical economists like to think, but we can use these mental accounting biases to our advantage. We have control over which accounts we set up and which we deduct from. Just be sure to remember that the next time you happen to lose your movie ticket.
All right, so I showed you that one, and now I'm going to jump to one other quick video, and then we'll chat about it.
Hi, my name is Laurie Santos. I teach psychology at Yale University, and today I want to talk to you about the G.I. Joe fallacy. This lecture is in the series on cognitive biases. If you've watched a bunch of these videos, you've probably gotten a bit better at noticing your biases at work, and knowing that you might fall prey to them. You might also think that knowing about your biases would, naturally, make you less susceptible to them. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. In fact, if you think knowing your biases is all you need to overcome them, then you'd be falling prey to yet another bias, the G.I. Joe fallacy. If you're a child of the 1980s, then you might have a guess about where the name from this bias comes from. Yes, it's from that cartoon known as G.I. Joe. Maybe you remember how these shows ended. Each episode had a sort of cheesy public service announcement that ended with the show's famous epithet, "Now you know, and knowing is half the battle." The problem with this idea, the idea that knowing is half the battle, is that cognitive science has shown us that merely knowing about our biases is often way less than half the battle. Now, there are certainly some cases where knowing is half the battle. Knowing your multiplication tables, for example, or knowing which aisle the milk is in. But there are many more where it's not the case, cases where just knowing something doesn't really help us all that much. For example, you may know that standing on the Grand Canyon skywalk is perfectly safe, but your mind will still feel like it's pretty scary. You may know that arbitrary anchors can mess up your final judgment, but you'll still feel like it's best to get 5 chocolates when you see a 5 for $5 sign. Finally, you may know that different wordings can affect your intuitions, but you still may be more hesitant to take a risk involving lives lost than lives saved. Years and years of research on cognitive biases has shown that knowing or recognizing yourself as having information is only a small part of what controls our behavior. In day-to-day situations, most of our behavioral control comes from other processes, like our habits or the situations we find ourselves in, and not from our conscious selves. This is why shaping our situations to nudge our behavior in the right direction, or even just learning to regulate your emotions, over time can be really powerful. The funniest part of the G.I. Joe fallacy is that even knowing about it, as the fallacy would predict, is less than half the battle. Even if you know that knowing is less than half the battle, you still have a tendency to think that what you consciously know is the main thing that controls your behavior. But it's not. Even if you've watched all of these videos, you're still going to be subject to the same effects that the videos describe. For most cognitive biases, including the G.I. Joe fallacy, knowing is not even half the battle. And so now you know, and that's less than half the battle.
All right, so let me switch back to the slides and I'll connect the dots here. Okay, so the moral of the story is that you can do all the mindset work that you want, but we're still subject to these biases. And I think the video on well, first off, the whole notion of selective attention. The reality is that we've got this system one in the background that's inherently biased, and we can't override it. And the G.I. Joe fallacy and all of the testing that's been done around that sort of proves it out. And in addition, we've got this whole mental accounting issue where how we bucketize our money will dramatically impact the way that we make decisions. And so with that in mind, we have to essentially rig the game to win. We've got to set up the right structures and processes and principles to ensure that we're not always being controlled by these biases. And so there's one other sort of piece to that, though, which is this idea that mayo is terrible. And to me, that's a fact. Mayo is the worst condiment of all time. And to me, that's a fact, but to most of you, that's probably fiction. But the way that we are wired is to make these quick decisions. We want to be able to bucketize things into, is this right or is this wrong? Is this fact or fiction? And there's a lot of science around this that connects back to these biases. And the reality is that because of our hardwiring around fight or flight and the kind of formal education system that most of us have gone through, we always want to bucket these things into fact or fiction. But is it a fact that mayo is awful? Well, I would say yes, that is a fact. But in actuality, there's a third category, which is preference. And so most of the decisions that each of you are making about your finances are really preference-based decisions. Should I hire someone? Should I fire someone? Should I invest more in marketing? Should I grow to 7 figures? Should I grow to 8 figures, 9 figures, so on and so forth? Those are all preference-based decisions. Now, the challenge with preference-based decisions is that they can't necessarily be Googled because there is not a right or wrong. One person could say, yes, I want to grow my business to 7 or 8 figures. I'm going to hire someone. Somebody else could say no to those. Both people could be right. And so when we have these biases and then most of our decisions being preferences, we have to essentially build out a whole new kind of toolkit to address those issues. That's really what we're going to be doing over the next 5 weeks. And so the moral of the story, all of that I've kind of shown you thus far is to build you up to understanding that we have these biases, and we must understand our game, and we must implement principles, determine our priorities, design the right systems and processes so that we get the outcomes that we want. Just simply knowing that biases exist, that's not good enough. The G.I. Joe fallacy exists. Mindset isn't enough because we have this system 1 and system 2 going on. Maybe mindset helps us with system 2, that which we have control over, but again, system 1 is out there and it cannot be turned off or overridden. So we have to find a different way. The conventional finance stuff isn't necessarily going to work for us, so how do we do that? And so the next step in that process is really understanding our game. And I guess up to this point, do you guys have any questions about, I should pause and see, any questions about sort of those biases and what I've shared thus far? Drop me a comment. Does it make sense? Does this feel true to you, that you've been sort of unknowingly subject to these biases and the way that you've been making decisions about your finances have sort of been somewhat controlled by the way that money has been bucketed? And have you sort of experienced that a lot of your decisions are actually preference-based, but you've been trying to find answers in more of a fact or fiction framework where you're trying to Google things and what's the right way for me to do this, when in actuality they're preference? Does that ring true to you all? So, anybody have any difference of opinion? So the first step really is this exercise to figure out what is your style, what is the game that you want to play. And there's 2 ways that we're going to figure this out. And one is through a more subjective exercise, and then one is through a more scientific-based approach. And the importance of understanding how you play your game is, again, back to sort of foreshadowing of this presentation, is if we want to win, we might as well win playing our game. Let's not win playing someone else's game. And so what is our game then? What is our style in business? And so we got to figure that out. And usually that's challenging for folks. They don't know what their style is. And so first exercise is to write down what it was your favorite sport or hobby growing up. And so I'll give you a few moments to think about it and just comment once you've written it down. Hockey, that makes sense, Marco. Anybody else care to share or just confirm once you've written down what your favorite sport or hobby was? And if you're unsure, it's valuable to share that as well. So the next piece is to think about what was it that you really enjoyed about this sport or hobby. So think about that for a few moments. Marco, maybe you're willing to share. What was it that you really enjoyed about hockey?
Do you want me to hit in the chat or just say it? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Actually, that's a good question. I don't really know if I have a good answer, but
Okay.
I think I loved the how fast it was, and the creativity that you could have playing, and at the same time, in a weird way, knowing that there are other people out to really hurt you. It kind of that adrenaline is amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so what was your style of play?
I was a defenseman, but offensive. So I played up till pro, and in college I led my team in scoring.
Hmm.
I basically quarterbacked like special teams, but
Okay.
was also defense first.
Okay.
So, and I would try to get wins whenever the opportunity kind of arose.
Nice. And so now thinking about the business that you're in now, what are the parallels that you see in terms of the way that you show up in the business and what you really enjoy about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of what I do for clients is a mix of that kind of both the creativity, but also numbers and data. So I do a lot of writing based off of kind of like economic. I study economics and math, and I work with brokers, commercial brokers, commercial real estate. So, but in my habits, I'm kind of like, I always make sure I do the client work first, and then I try to get that done as soon as possible, and then I'm just trying to implement stuff on the business. So trying to take advantage of that extra time when I can.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see the parallel between what you really enjoyed about hockey and your style of play in hockey to what you really enjoy about what you do now in your business?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, now that you just actually kind of made me articulate that, I can see, yeah, same kind of parallels. There's, obviously less of a safety net, when you have your own business, and lots of opportunity for big wins, and those, big wins feel amazing, better than anything you can get anywhere else. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so I've done this exercise with countless folks at this point, maybe not hundreds, but maybe approaching that. And this was a little exercise that a coach did with me. He was sort of part of the early Bill Gates days at Microsoft on the HR side. And what he sort of recognized, and it's more of an experiential thing rather than science-based, but generally as a kid, you get to figure out your favorite sport or hobby. Like you get to choose that, ignoring certain socioeconomic conditions, but you largely get to choose that. And you get to choose how you show up and how you play. And so to some degree, it's sort of the closest, or not to be woo-woo, but it's sort of the freest expression of who you are. And then in formal school and as you sort of progress, you tend to be forced to kind of conform to whatever those social norms are to some degree, and maybe you lose some of the things that you really enjoyed in your favorite sport or hobby because you're told you have to act in accordance to some other social norms. But what I kind of find universal when I do this exercise is that folks are the most, I'll just say, happy, for lack of a better descriptor, in their business when they're acting sort of in alignment with the way that they would play their favorite sport or hobby. And so it tends to be the greatest upside for them is really leaning into those attributes and really writing out what, Marco, going back to you in hockey, really writing out like what is it that you enjoyed about the sport and what was your style, and then matching that, like how would that show up in your business specifically, and really putting that down in paper then allows you to play your game more, because it's going to be it's going to have the greatest potential for upside for you. It's also going to have the greatest potential for downside, and we're going to talk later when we get into financial principles about how we hedge downside risk. But our greatest strength tends to be our greatest weakness. And I know that from my own experience, so I'll just share with you guys. So my favorite sport or hobby growing up was basketball, and what I really enjoyed about the sport is that you can be kind of you're on a team, but at the same point you have the opportunity to be an independent contributor, and you can somewhat dictate the outcome of the game, and there's an opportunity to take the last shot. And so my style of play was I wanted to be shooting guard, I want to have the ball, I want to take the last shot, but I'm not the most like athletically gifted person, so hustle was sort of my thing. Like I'm going to dive on the floor, like try to compensate for maybe not being the most athletically gifted, but like at the end of the day, I'm willing to take that last shot. And so in the way it translates for me in business is that when I don't feel like I'm making impact, when I'm just sort of going along with what everyone else is doing, then I'm feeling pretty complacent because I want to be part of a team, but I also want to have the opportunity to sort of make an impact, win the game. And I'm willing to take that last shot. So I'm willing to take some risks. Now the problem is that sometimes I shouldn't take the last shot. Sometimes I need to pass the ball, and sometimes I shouldn't hustle. And so it becomes a little bit of a mental exercise for me often to be able to sort of step back and reflect and go, okay, am I playing my game too much here? In other words, am I taking too many shots, too many risks? Do I need to pass the ball? And it allows me just to sort of recalibrate in a non-scientific way. And is the thing that always up-levels my business. And so this is a little bit woo-woo, but we're going to connect the dots with something called Colby, the Colby A index. And it's Colby A index. Has anybody in the group taken this before? And drop me a comment. Marco, I think I got your audio. So have you taken the Colby A before?
I don't think so, no. Is it like, I've taken like DISC and some other ones, but I don't know if it's the same thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's unlike all the others like DISC and the different colored ones and all of that you can do. It basically figures out what you're most inclined to do and least inclined to do. And so it breaks things down into four different segments. One is fact finder. In other words, are you someone who wants to really dig into details? The next one is quick start, which is like how quickly do you take action? And there's implementer, which is, okay, you've sort of, maybe you're an idea person, but you're not necessarily inclined to carry things out completely. And there's one more that's escaping me in this moment. But I'm going to be giving you guys access for each of you to complete a Colby A index and get a sense of what your style is beyond just the more subjective exercise that I just shared with you. And in combination of the sort of what's your style, what's your game, and the Colby index, you'll get a better sense of what your style is and therefore what your potential risks are in business as we start to move forward and start to analyze where are the gaps in your business, where are the opportunities to optimize cash flow, what are the biggest risks to your business long term. That could be in marketing, that could be financial, that could be operational. Your style is going to be your greatest strength. It's also going to be your greatest weakness. So in terms of homework, if you haven't completed the online assessment, and just about everybody has, but there's a few that haven't, the online assessment that I sent out last week, which is a bunch of questions of things like, are you utilizing the Augusta loophole, stuff like that. If you haven't done that, please complete that. Also, I'm going to give you access to a portal to upload your tax returns and give you some directions to give me access to your finances. And then I'll give you a link to the Colby A index to complete that. It takes about 20 minutes to do that. And then go through that exercise. I'll give you guys basically the slide that I had up previously to work through and figure out what your game is. Those things are going to be kind of the jumping off point for moving forward as we really dig into financial principles and financial processes and unpacking the gaps that exist. So any questions that anyone has at this point? I know this is fairly philosophical first meeting, but it really, I think you'll see how it all fits together as we dig into the details in the next five weeks or so.
I don't have tax returns for the last year and a half, 2 years.
Okay.
Just upload my old ones or give you QuickBooks access or something.
If you don't have, upload your old ones and then give me access to QuickBooks, and I'll give you instructions for that.
Awesome. Thank you. I had a meeting with somebody on your team. They canceled. Can we set up a meeting with me and you?
Yep.
About taxes? Perfect.
Yep. Yeah, so after next week, I'm going to have each of you set up a one-on-one call with me as well. So maybe we'll just piggyback off that meeting and talk about your taxes, as well as we're gonna be working through how we match, just to sort of, I guess, spoiler alert, how we take your Colby Index and your sort of game assessment, and then how do we match that with some financial principles that I'm going to teach you, so we can figure out how to actually operationalize that in your business, and then layer over the top is sort of mapping out what I call profit priorities. Those things in combination are going to kind of power all of the gap assessment, the risk assessment that we're going to do, a lot of the tax strategies that we're going to do. So more to come on that front.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned this on the call with Nick, but I'm literally in the process of getting residency status in the U.S.
Yep.
So I have my interview in 3 weeks for the green card, and so for me, I'm kind of like a blank slate when it comes to everything. U.S. tax, U.S. financials. Obviously, GAAP and accounting principles are, I guess, the same in Canada where I'm coming from. But so I don't know. I just want to be a sponge. I'm not 100% sure about a lot of these things. So just so you're aware. Yeah.
Cool. Well, good news. About 80% of this will apply anywhere in the world in terms of the financial principles for decision making, how to go about identifying risks across your business, and so on and so forth. And there's 20% that's really kind of U.S. tax focused. I do have a Canadian tax advisor that I lined up for you as well, just because you told me on the onset that this scenario. So to the extent to which we need to kind of blend Canadian and U.S. tax, I do have someone lined up to help us out with that.
Awesome. And I do have an accountant in Toronto currently, from the past, but so I don't know if, I guess maybe we can talk later or through message. I don't want to take up other people's time, but if I transition over or whatnot. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we can certainly leverage that existing account.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Andrew, any questions on your end?
Yeah, I've been diving into a bunch of books. I just read the top 10 ways to avoid taxes the other day.
Okay.
Really
Right
fucking enjoyed it. There's a lot that I want to uncover. Just wondering when we should do that. My top things are putting my money into life insurance and how that affects my taxes.
Yep.
If I should file my last year's taxes since I got an extension, should I file them in Ohio or should I file them in California?
Yep.
And then I have a bunch of other stuff, but that's way too much.
So we're going to really dig into all the tax stuff in week three
Cool.
and 4.
Cool.
This is just sort of the building blocks to really optimize that stuff. So things like, and just to sort of elaborate on that. So life insurance, for example, is a tax strategy that can work for anybody, but it isn't necessarily something that we should do for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of connects back to essentially what are your profit priorities, what are some of your long-term objectives, what are some other strategies that we may want to implement first.
Cool.
So it's just getting it in the right sequence.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning that way because I want to retire super early, and I think I can do it with my businesses. So yeah, I was looking at I don't want to do a Roth IRA. I have some money in Roth IRA and all the retirement plans. I want to keep most of my money liquid. So that was one of the strategies that I was looking into.
Okay. Have you looked into something called a mega Roth? I know you just said I don't want to do a Roth, but a mega Roth is something called a structured investment, and basically what we do is we use a life insurance contract, and we strip out all the death benefit, and then we basically get this. We can then use it to invest in whatever, essentially tax-free, like a Roth. So we
So
can
is
sort of
that-
get all of the, yeah.
Is that still covered by the tax code 7702A for life insurance benefits?
Yeah.
That is, the mega Roth is?
Yeah, it's leveraging that part of the tax code.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. And because the thing about life insurance is to some degree you have to die to get the cash out, right? to some extent. So it's often used for legacy. So we can find a hybrid where we basically use the structure, the tax advantages of a life insurance contract, but get the more short-term advantage.
Cool.
So we don't have to die to get the benefit.
Dope. Yeah, that sounds great.
That's the thought process there.
Cool. Should we elaborate more on that on our one-on-one and then bring that up throughout the calls throughout the 6 weeks?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay, cool. Sweet. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Was this valuable? Was this on track? Is it too woo-woo? Did it make sense?
A little woo-woo, but I'm ready for the next few weeks. Last thing for me, are we talking about any type of real estate, how to use real estate to mitigate taxes, those sorts of things?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Cool. Well, thanks, everyone.